Hello! In this video I will show you two approaches to mixing Atmos. We will also compare stereo downmixes and binaural renders, and because this is a mix for a live performance that was shot on video, I will show you how to add video to music mixed in Atmos. Let's start. This approach is kind of a standard now, and is based on either completely ignoring center channel or using it minimally. If you look at the tracks, you'll notice that they're all stereo, and all of them are not panned to the center. For example, guitar is mono, but I use a stereo configuration so I can pan it without using the center channel. The same for the kick. There's some limitations with this panning. For example, I moved the kick drum very slightly forward, but it's mostly in the left and right channels. If I move it forward too much, the phantom center can break down, and the snare has the same panning as the kick. Here I have a 714 re-render in my session broken down into channel pairs: left and right, center, sides, rears, LFE, top front and top rear channels. I will play back kick and snare and watch the meters. Signal is mostly in the left and right channels, with just a bit of signal in the sides. The overheads are slightly raised, and there is a bit of signal in the top speakers. Now, this is not very immersive, and absence of signal in the center can create a hole. If everything only coming from left and right, the center might feel empty. For this reason, I always add at least a bit of reverb in the center channel. Here I used UAD Sound City reverb and panned it to the center. Let's listen. It's kind of dry and roomy, and kick is very prominent. Second reverb is panned to the sides. Another reverb is in the rears. And the final one is at the top. Let's hear them combined and then with the drums. Most of the energy is still in front left and right channels, but reverb glues things together and fills in the room. You can of course use immersive reverbs. It's just fun to sometimes build reverb using different combinations of mono and stereo reverbs. Let's move on to the bass. I narrowed it down so a bit of signal would bleed into the center channel. I also sent a bit of the signal to the rear speakers. Let's listen. Now let's listen to separate channels of 714 re-render. Center, fronts, rears. Just as the drum's reverb fills in the room, I wanted the bass to also feel bigger and glue with the overall drum sound. By deciding how and where sounds interact with each other and how separated they are, we control glue and separation in Atmos. For example, I wanted to keep keys glued to the main rhythm section, and that's why they're panned to front left and right channels. While horns are placed roughly in between front and side speakers, separating them from the rhythm section. But because drums reverb is placed everywhere, things are still interacting with each other and still being glued together to some extent. Let's listen and hear different channels of 714 re-render. Unlike the horns, which are actually stereo, the guitar is mono, and I cannot move it too close to the side speakers because the phantom center will break down and the guitar will sound hollow. That's something you have to keep in mind when using this approach. Let's listen to how it's balanced in different channels. Background vocals are panned to the sides. There's nothing too special, mostly I just wanted to separate them from everything else. The lead vocal is more interesting. It is panned to front left and right channels and slightly raised, but it also has a slapback delay that is panned to the center.
Got a new guitar, 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 got a new guitar.
So, with this approach, most of the sound energy is placed in the front. The sense of immersion is really created by effects and by some odd tracks that can be panned more freely depending on the song arrangement. Now, let's compare the stereo downmix and binaural render and see how different they are.
Got a new guitar,
Feels like heaven's grace.
play the strings,
Lose a smile on my face.
from dusk till down.
I'm willing to bet if somebody heard this binaural mix, they wouldn't realize that it's not a stereo mix. Of course, with different settings there can be more of a difference, especially if you have things like head tracking. In this mix though, there is hardly any difference, which was on purpose actually. And I also think that stereo down mixes work perfectly fine, and you don't really need a separate stereo mix. Now let's move on to the panning approach I actually used in this mix. Whatever you call this approach, the main distinction would probably be a natural heavy use of the center channel, because we are not actively trying to avoid it. Let's listen to stereo downmix.
Got a new guitar,
Feels like heaven's grace.
play the strings,
Lose a smile on my face.
from dusk till
You probably noticed that it sounds a lot more mono in the downmix compared to the previous version. This is not because of the center channel itself, but because I just used very different panning in this version. Keys and horns were panned closer to the center compared to the previous version. I could have used similar panning as in previous version, and the mix would have sounded wider. But let's take a closer look at panning. I moved the kick much closer to the listener position in the center, and it's very narrow, but still some signal bleeds into front speakers and even side speakers. The snare has similar panning with slight elevation. Pay attention to the meters. Moving on to the overheads. They are almost floating very slightly behind the kick and the snare. And because there is a lot of signal in the center, I didn't need to use the mono reverb, but I still used the rest. I will exaggerate the verb so you can hear it better. The bass is panned kind of behind the kick, and mostly contained in the center. But let's check how much of the bass can be heard in different channels. The guitar is basically 100% mono now and actively uses center channel. And because of that I can move it as close as I want to the listening position. Let's listen to different channels of 714 re-render. This is really the strength of this approach, and it's easier to deal with mono sounds and place them because you don't need to avoid center channel. The keys and horns have a bit more narrow panning compared to the first approach and keeping close to the drums. And finally, the lead vocal has more signal coming out of the center channel, while still using the slapback in the center, and elevation providing slight separation from the drums.
Play the strings.
Now let's compare stereo downmix to binaural.
Got a new guitar.
Feels like heaven's grace.
Play the strings.
Puts a smile on my face.
From dusk till down.
She's my faithful friend.
With every chord.
My rule is that's
And finally, let's compare both versions.
Got a new guitar.
feels like heaven's grace.
Play the strings.
Puts a smile on my face.
From dusk till down.
She's my faithful friend.
With every chord.
My rule is that's
So, here it is. Both approaches work quite well, but they are different. This also happens because with different panning you might make different EQ decisions, for example. And in those mixes I did EQ tracks slightly differently, so it's not just panning. Right now I would say that most engineers use stereo-based approach, but to be honest I think it's mostly because we are still holding on to the stereo and to things like mixing into a limiter. Small addition from editing. When reading Floyd Toole's book Sound Reproduction, there was a paragraph about phantom image. It explains that sounds that rely on phantom center will have a dip in the spectrum at around 2K. This is due to how the same sound from two speakers interacts with our head. But the important part is that it can result in engineer boosting this frequency area for all sounds that rely on the phantom center. Now imagine, you mixed a song in stereo first, then you take a vocal or a snare and pan it to the center channel in Atmos. It can't sound too harsh or unnatural, because you will not have this 2K dip that you compensated for while mixing in stereo. If you use the center channel, you will hear natural timbre of sounds placed there, and you will not have as much 2K. This is probably the reason I think why many engineers don't like to use center channel, especially for tracks that were mixed in stereo first. If you want to learn more, go and read Sound Reproduction by Floyd Toole. Now back to the rest of the video. And finally, let's create deliverables of the Atmos mix with video. In Dolby Atmos Suite, you can open up your Atmos ADM file. Then you can export MP4 file and add already edited video through Custom Video option. What you will get is DD plus JOC consumer type file. You can play back this file on any consumer device that supports Atmos, but it's not something you provide Netflix, for example. To generate proper deliverable, you'll need DaVinci Resolve, at least that's what I used. First, you need to make sure that Atmos is enabled in Preferences. Then you need to import ADM file into the timeline in Fairlight through Import of Master File option. Now we can add the video. Since I already have edited video, I can just go to the Export tab, and I just need to choose Netflix preset and export the file. Now you have an MP4 file that can be used for quality control, or you can just share it with friends and fans directly, since that's pretty much what consumers get anyway. And you also have a proper master file with audio and video. If you work with music, this is probably going to be a very rare case like it is for me, but at least you have a very basic guide what to do if you get a request like this. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.